All right, let's now go over our Fusion interface. So I'm not gonna be making anything in this video. I'm just gonna show you where all of the tools are that you are going to be likely to access. So when you're in your Fusion Hub and you come to new, usually you're gonna go ahead and select part design. That is if you wanna, actually make an individual part. Over here, you'll see that there are a couple different types. We're gonna just stay in standard for the most part, and then you can choose your unit system. It's really whatever you're comfortable with, but you might have to, make some adjustments to that later. I use inches because in America, we tend to use the wrong units, unfortunately. So there's also this like assistant thing over here. I'm not gonna really bother with that for now. This is what you enter into. This is what you see when you first create a part design. One of the most important things is this navigation. So this button, this home, will set you back to what's called isometric view, where you can see the top, front, and right side of the object that you're making. And it'll be easier to tell when we actually make something, but you can also click around these different click around the box, if you want to see the left and the front, but not the top or the bottom. You can click over here. You can click up to rotate it. You can do whatever you want. There's these rotate icons that appear. You can change it to whoever you want, but if you press that home button, it will take you back to isometric view, just because this is the standard for what we normally use to view our parts. Down here, you will see a couple different tools. You have an orbit tool, which if you click on this, then you can rotate freely when you hold down your left click. You have your look at tool, which you can click on a specific face or something and then look at that directly. You have the pan tool, which allows you to move along the same plane that you have set up. Zoom, obviously, that is going to zoom you in. Zoom window, fit, display settings. You can, set up how you want to see. I don't usually use anything down here besides your pan and your orbit tools for the most part. Now, you can also zoom using your scroll wheel if you have one. That's why it's kind of, the best to use a mouse for this. A mouse and keyboard is the best thing that you can do. Let me go back to home here, because your scroll wheel will zoom in and out for you. I don't know why. Yeah, so if you click on zoom, then you can use your left click for it, but usually you can just use your scroll wheel. And if you have a button, if your scroll wheel, if your scroll wheel has a button where you can press this in, it becomes a pan tool as well. So the mouse is definitely easier. If you have a trackpad, you can still do all these things. It just might be a little bit more annoying to do. So I would definitely recommend getting a mouse for this if you can. So this is your plane. You can see the red line is your x-axis, green line is your y-axis, going upwards is your z-axis. You can see over here, everything's color-coded. It's not too bad. Over here, you'll see your document settings where you can change your units at any time, or you don't see it. All right, never mind. You see it now over here. I had the wrong OBS window. It's supposed to be display capture. You see it over here. You can see document settings where you can change your units. This is a part design. You can change it if you need to change it to an assembly or something like that. Your named views you can change if you want to, and you can click on them from here. And then your origin, if you see these arrows over here, this can expand menus. This is going to be really important later. But you can set your origin point to a different point. 0, 0 is generally where we operate. This is your origin point. You can set that differently if you want in your origin. So generally, what you're going to be working with before you create anything is the sketch tool. So this enters sketch mode, you create something two-dimensional, and then when you're finished creating something two-dimensional is when you use the other things on this create tab for the most part. Extrude, we're going to be using a lot. Revolve, we're going to be using a lot. Hole as well. Rectangular pattern, not as much. And then there's this form as well, which you also may use. I'll do a separate video on that. Automated modeling, I don't really use much, but you can, play around with that if you want. It looks at different faces and automatically generates alternative examples for you to use. It's helpful if you're kind of just playing around. Your modify, again, requires you to have some 3D part. Like everything on these menus, for the most part, you will need to create a 3D part to be able to do anything with. But you can see all of these different tools. Fillet, we do use a lot. Shell, some people do use. Combine, split body, move or copy. Your configure, you probably won't need to access much going on in this menu. Construct is one that you definitely might need to access. It allows you to create planes so that you can create sketches on specific planes. You can also measure if you want to look at something that you've made and measure it directly. You don't remember exactly what those dimensions were. You can do that as well. Perform some different analyses. Generally, measure is kind of the only one that I've experimented with. Over here, insert, you might need some of these. You can insert some meshes to like an existing file as a mesh body. That might be helpful, or a picture, so that a lot of people will put a picture in here so that they can trace it. Like if you want to create a specific type of character, you can put a picture that isn't actually part of it, but you can use it to like trace over. And then your assembly will be a separate video where you assemble completely different parts together. So let's go into Sketch. When you click Sketch, the first thing that you will see is this, a couple planes show up here. This is asking what plane you want to create your sketch on. So it really depends on what you want to do. Do you want to create a sketch that is flat on the X plane, standing up on the Z plane, going backwards on the Y plane? However you want to create it. I'm going to create an XY plane sketch. So when I click on it, we have now entered into Sketch. We've got a completely different menu. Generally, anything that you create, you will start with a sketch. You'll see over here, this is pretty much just visualization, visualization settings. You'll also see that this finish sketch just brings you back to our main template here where we see everything in 3D. One of the most important things to do, make sure that you do this, is expand over here. Once you create a sketch, it goes under sketches. Make sure that you expand this arrow so that you can always see your sketches. And now from here, when you right click on the sketch that we were just in, you can either double click on it and it comes into finish your sketch. You can see that here. If you right click on it, you can do different things like create an offset plane, redefine the plane that it's on. For example, if you wanted it to be XY and instead, you ended up making it on this front plane, you can redefine that here as well. But when you right click, and you can also come to edit sketch from here. You can see that there's a red lock symbol right here. That is what we want to see. That means that anything that we have drawn is defined. Any dimension that we need to know has been properly defined in our actual sketch. In the Create tab here, there are a lot of options. This is kind of usually where we start out with either a line, a rectangle coming out of different points. You can make a 2-point rectangle, center rectangle. I encourage you to explore all of these things for yourself. You can also add in text on top of something, and then that will also be part of your 3D model. So let's just go ahead and create a 2-point rectangle. I'll bring it out from our origin, and we will go ahead and define this as a 2-inch. You can see over here, you can type in your dimensions. When I tab it over, it goes between the dimensions that I need to finalize. And let's go 2.5. When we click enter, we can see that this rectangle has been defined. Our red lock is here. If we were to take away a dimension, we can see that this symbol appears now on our sketch. The pencil symbol, that means that there's a dimension missing. We can also see that if we kind of come over here, there's one line that's blue. That means that it's not sure where this line is in relation to the rest of the rectangle. Fusion, it's very important that you are using the origin whenever you can. A lot of what you're going to be defining is in relation to that origin point. So from the origin to here, we know is 2.5 inches. So we know that this is also 2.5 inches, but we don't know where it is in relation to this other line that's 2.5 inches. So you have to make sure that everything is defined. There's a couple ways to add dimensions as well. Up here, you know, you have constraints, which you can do, like you can add specific types of constraints, meaning like constraining it to a specific point. So if you didn't know exactly how many inches this line is going to be, but you know that it's going to be perpendicular to this line here, then you can use a perpendicular constraint and tap those two things. It's telling me it's over constrained because these two. So let's go ahead and perpendicular. It's a rectangle already, so it knows that these lines are perpendicular. But if you were going to create them, then that's how that would look. Auto constrain can be helpful. It just kind of guesses what the dimensions and the constraints are going to look like based on what you have already drawn. Sometimes it can't do it. It really struggles with very complicated lines, but generally if this is what you want, you just don't have a dimension, you can go ahead and click auto constrain and it will guess here that this is supposed to be 2 inches because that's what it is currently. And if you click OK, it will just go ahead and lock that in. We can see this red lock symbol. So while you're in Sketch, there's a lot of different options that you have. You have this modify where you can fillet, chamfer, blend curve, offset. These are a lot of different tools that allow you to change or modify the way that your design looks. You have the constraints. Right now, everything is fully constrained, so we don't necessarily need it. And then this is where you can also insert more like a picture or a mesh or anything like that. So now that we finished our sketch, we can come back out, finish it. We see that this is red locked. It's fully defined. We know where this square is, and we also know, or it's not a square, excuse me. We know where this rectangle is, and we also know the measurements of every single line that's in our sketch. When we come back out to this solid tab over here, this is where we can actually make this 2D sketch into something 3-dimensional. What you're usually going to be using is extrude, but you can also use, I'll go over like in more depth some of these specific specific tools that you can use for different types of applications. Generally, extrude is where we're going to go with this. If we do click that, you can see that we can drag it up or down, creating a 3-dimensional object. Again, you can define how big it is. We say it's 2 inches, for example, and now we've got a box. For modifying this, we can, for example, fillet it. If we want to fillet the edges, faces, features, we can go ahead, select an edge, for example. We're going to fillet that down. Maybe this is something like what we want. And you can play around with these modify tools for different types of applications. If we want to press pull it, we're just going to drag out this side here, for example, however you end up wanting this to exist. I'm going to be going over in future videos specific applications of using these tools. This is more just to go through the actual interface of Fusion and what things you might need to access. So you can see that there's all these tabs as well. We have surface, which has similar mesh, where you can create a mesh, sheet metal, plastic. You can do whatever you want in Fusion. Generally, we work with solids. So honestly, I don't really know as much about creating surfaces and meshes, but if that's something that you're interested in, then you can go ahead and do that. In your design section, like this is kind of your main menu for your device. So this is your, like if you wanted to create a design, a generative design, I mean, I guess it uses AI and stuff. This is also where you might render your designs. Generally in the class, we will be going through render and drawings. So rendering basically just allows you to create like a more realistic picture of what your specific design looks like. It's going to add appearances that make it seem more like a real thing, less like an actual, like a CAD design. Drawing, we're also going to be using a lot. So this is how you access drawing. This creates a technical drawing, a multi-view drawing from your isometric view. So for example, if I go to create drawing, it's going to create a separate file. You want to make sure that you save it in the right spot, and then you're going to set up some specific settings depending on what you want. Units is probably the most important thing here, and then the sheet paper size. So if you want just like a regular piece of paper size, then that would be size A. It really doesn't matter that much, but it's going to create a drawing, an isometric view drawing. Let's see, can I get rid of this just so that you can see it a little bit better, where it appears as a drawing with nothing on it, and you have to go in, right click, or create up here your views of your design. And we're going to talk, specifically about drawings as well, but this allows you to create projected views so that you can see, for example, this is what this looks like from the front side, the right side, and the top side. This is another thing that we're going to be doing quite a lot. So let's go ahead and get back to our little box part. You can also see up here, we have our home that takes us back to the hub, the data panel. You can access other projects from here, your file, where you can save this. You can create a new part from here. You can export it as an STL. This is probably the most important piece here. We're going to be using this file tab to export it, to save it as the type of file that you need to actually print. And you've got an undo button and you've got a redo button as well. Up here is where you can see, you can access your account from here. You can access the Autodesk Assistant from here if you have notifications, any extensions that you might add, and you can also see your design. So we can see up here our drawing, and then we can see over here our part design. So the last thing that's important to know for this, interface kind of tutorial is down here on this bar shows us our timeline of what we have created. So you can see here when I hover over this kind of black line, I can actually go back through some earlier things that I did. So if I'm like, oh, I need to go check and see how I got to this point, you can actually go backwards through the timeline. Oh, okay, I used press pull here, and that's how I expanded this. Or, oh, okay, I used fillet from here, and I must have used it on this edge, and go back through the timeline and make changes in these different parts of the timeline without necessarily having to go through and make deletions, because a lot of times if we make mistakes, our instinct is just like, okay, I'm just going to delete it and start over because I don't know how to make changes. The timeline is going to help you a lot when you kind of go back through. Also, if you have specific questions on things, going back through the timeline can be helpful to see exactly where problems have come up. But that's going to do it for this tutorial. Again, a lot of these tools I just kind of went over as where you can find things, but in future videos we will talk through some of the most important tools that you will be using.